Kiss it for me, I owe it so much. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. I'm continuing my masculine feminine energies film breakdown series with 84 Charing Cross Road. If you're not familiar with what I mean by masculine and feminine energies, I talk about this in most of my videos, but a brief summary. Masculine and feminine energies are energies that live within all of us. We all contain both energies. We all have a core energy that's when we're most ourselves in. That energy often links up with our gender. It doesn't have to, but it very often does. And we can be in wounded or healed versions of either of these energies. And each of these energies contains archetypes, and we can embody any of the archetypes whenever we need to, but we're usually more comfortable in some than in others. And in order to have sexual polarity in a relationship, you need to have one partner in the masculine and one partner in the feminine, because opposite energies attract sexually and same energies repel sexually. So 84 Charing Cross Road is a film from 1987, but it takes place during the time period of 1949 and 1969. I had actually never seen this movie before, and I actually had never even heard of this movie before. This movie was actually a recommendation from my good friend Dominick Izzo. I actually have been a frequent guest on his podcast. I will link those episodes in the description box below. We talk about movies, relationship dynamics, stuff like that, so if you enjoy this content, you'd probably really enjoy listening to our episodes, so be sure you check those out. So I watched this movie to do this breakdown, and honestly, it is such a charming movie. Charming is just the only word that I can think of for this movie, because it is just so sweet and charming. It just like left a big smile on my face. Even though I have to admit the ending was kind of sad, it was still just a sweet film. This film was actually a novel and based on a true story. So the main character in this movie is Helene, played by Anne Bancroft, and she is a sassy New York writer who has a thing for kind of obscure English literature. She's been unable to find some books that she's interested in the bookshops in New York, so she ends up hearing about this shop in England, and she starts writing to them to see if they have the book she's interested in. Her correspondence mainly is with the bookshop manager, Frank, played by Anthony Hopkins, although she does end up connecting with most of the other people from the bookshop. They kind of become like this extended family to her. But the whole film, she is in New York and they're in England, and they only correspond by letters, as well as sending each other gifts, and you know, she sends them money, they send her books, things like that. And the juxtaposition between this sort of sassy New York woman and this sort of very proper British gentleman is actually really interesting, and I think it really makes the movie. So Frank is a very grounded masculine character. He is very serious, very determined, he's very knowledgeable, he's very focused. He's married to Nora, who is played by Judi Dench, and they tend to have a very like proper relationship. And his letters from Helene are sort of just a breath of fresh air for him, because she's very sassy, she's very funny, she's very entertaining, and he really does become quite enamored with her, even though they've never actually met. Now, Helene is very feminine, but not in the way that we think of as stereotypically feminine, but she is so sensual. She has a ton of lover energy within her, even though she doesn't really have a romantic interest specifically in this movie. Although her and Frank have this, they have this sort of romance, this sort of love, but it's not a sexual relationship, and they don't actually meet in this movie. But Helene is so sensual. I mean, she's a writer, so she's a creative. She's very much obsessed with words and letters. She even talks about, she gets these books one time and she talks about how she has to read them out loud because they need to be read out loud. She talks so much about the books and how they feel, like the textures of them, the appearance of them, the look of them. She has a ton of sensuality when it comes to books. I have to say, I will stand by this statement. I cannot get into audiobooks, and I cannot get into like reading things on a reader, like an electronic reader, like ebooks and things like that. Like I only get when I absolutely have to. There's something about reading a book, like reading an actual book. It's a sensual activity, and like she talks about the difference between the feel of the pages from these older books from England as opposed to the books that you find in the United States. She talks about the gold leafing and the texture and the look of how these books look on her bookshelf. Like she's such a sensual being, and the fact that she's a writer, and a beautiful writer at that, she's able to express these things. She's able to express her sensuality in words that many people may not be able to. She's also got a very open throat chakra. She speaks her mind and she speaks her truth, which is a big stereotype that many people think that being a feminine woman is about sitting still and looking pretty. But feminine women may look pretty, but we don't sit still and we don't keep our mouth shut. That's just not how it works. The feminine is about expressing yourself, expressing your truth, and oh my goodness, Helene is just amazing at that. She does make make comments sometimes that if she were to meet these people in person, she doesn't know if she would be able to express herself the same way, because there is that level of writing in letters that makes her feel more comfortable expressing herself. I actually think it's really interesting. This movie is kind of a precursor to social media. You know, it's like having these friends who are in a totally different part of the world. You've never met in person, but you become like family with them. You become like friendships, and you can say things to them that you might not normally say if you saw someone face to face. That can be a good thing, that can be a bad thing. Of course, there's a lot of people who are going to be ruder in person, like we talk about social media today, because they can hide behind a screen. However, there's also that level of being able to be a little bit more yourself and speak your truth, because you're somewhat protected. You're not actually standing in front of someone and being like, fully see me. You can actually express yourself in a way that, you know, can be maybe more yourself or more playful or more fun, because there's a slight less risk of rejection than there would be if you had someone standing in front of you. So watching this movie now and seeing it as kind of like a precursor to this whole social media world that we're in was actually really fascinating. It was, I mean, back then obviously it was letter writing, so like this happened over the course of years of, you know, letters having to travel back and forth, and today everything is like instant. But it's the same idea. It's that same idea of being able to connect to anyone in the world and actually creating relationships with people that aren't even actually, you know, in the same continent that you're on, but you can still connect with people, and you can still form these friendships and bonds with people from like all over, because you have things in common and because you enjoy each other's conversations and personalities. So I think it's one of the reasons why I took to this movie so much, is because it does remind me so much of the world we're in today, but well, a little bit more charming, quaint version of it. Now I will say that Helene does really love to send gifts, which is much more masculine energy, constantly wanting to gift things to people. That is very much masculine energy, as opposed to being open to receive. So in that way, she's sending them food and things like that. She actually finds this company that will send food to England in like gift packages and stuff, and she's talking to her friend who's from England, and he was talking about sending different foods, and he says raspberries, and she's like, raspberries, like imagine a whole country that says raspberries. It's that love of words, playing with words and how the words feel and sound and things like that. Like, she's such a sensual being. It's very interesting too also, Helene is very particular about the types of books that she likes, and in the beginning she's very specific about what she likes and what she doesn't like. Being very particular and needing things to be just a certain way, that's also very much masculine energy. But as time goes on, she starts to relax, and she actually starts to trust Frank's judgment more, because she knows now that Frank knows her so well. So she'll actually like write to him. At one point she's looking out the window and she sees this young couple in love, and she's like, send me a book of love poems. It's like she starts to relax and trust in Frank's leadership, trust that Frank knows her well enough to know what she wants. Like, that is her leaning back and relaxing more into her feminine. She was a little bit more in her masculine direction at first, but then she starts to lean back and open up because she trusts his direction. At first, I mean, she doesn't know this guy doesn't know her, so obviously she has to give him more direction, or else, you know, he wouldn't know what to send her. But like, as they get to know each other and she starts to trust in his leadership and his direction and his knowledge of his business, his knowledge of her, she can start relaxing and sort of let him send things to her. But she's also very open about when she likes something and when she doesn't, and she's very playful about it, and they have this really great dynamic where she can just sort of say whatever and he finds it entertaining. A healthy, grounded, masculine man will take things like the feminine giving criticism, or the feminine, you know, saying something isn't good enough or whatever, and can kind of see it as humorous and see it as a part of life, and not take it too personal, not take it as his failure if she didn't enjoy a book. He's not taking it as, okay, he failed. He's taking it as a redirection, or he's taking it as a wake-up call, like, okay, I'm gonna try something different this time, as opposed to seeing it as her criticizing and him just trying to please her. Helene also mentions too that she is not really into fiction, that she doesn't want stories that haven't actually happened. She's very much into nonfiction. Like, she doesn't really necessarily care about the novels. Like, she wants to know like people's stories, people's true stories. That kind of stuff is much more feminine, like wanting to know about the person and wanting to actually connect with people. She talks too about reading books that she knows other people have read, like having inscriptions in the book and things like that, like knowing that she's connected to other people who have also read this same book and having those connections and stuff. That's very much feminine energy, wanting to connect with people and to see these books as actually being relationships. Like, you're connecting with other people, you're learning about relationships with other people. Like, those kind of things are all very much feminine energy. Helene really does live for the sensual pleasures in life. She's so feminine, and this movie is such a great representation of the feminine just enjoying the sensual pleasures. Like, it's like Helene is running late, she's trying to get someplace, and then she finds out that her books have arrived, and it's just like she just sinks into the pleasure of her books. Like, it's very much lover energy. We often think of lover energy as being about sexuality. Lover energy is very much about sensuality, so it doesn't actually even have to include sex. It can, but it doesn't have to. And I actually think this movie is such a great representation of that because it's sensuality about books, which isn't something that we normally think of as being sensual. So I think it's evident that when you have a truly feminine being, she can find sensuality and joy and pleasure out of anything in life. Like, it doesn't have to just be a sexual activity. It doesn't have to be a man. It can actually be about anything. It can be about books. You know, it can be about literature. It can be about shoes. It can be about anything. Nature, food, anything like that can become a sensual pleasure. Music, dancing, literally anything can become a sensual pleasure if you're a feminine being and you're approaching something from your feminine energy. I won't give away the ending because some of you may not have seen this movie, and I highly recommend you watch this movie after you watch this video to see if you can pick up on some of the things I was talking about. But in the last letter that Nora, Frank's wife, sends to Helene, she talks about Frank in such a beautiful way that so represents masculine energy. She talks about his humor, how he was well-adjusted, which if you think about it in British terms really means that he was very stable. She talks about him being modest, which the masculine is not necessarily about this like grandiose masculinity. It can very often be very stable and grounded, which can feel very modest. And she talks about so many people telling her that Frank is knowledgeable in his field, and the way she put it was imparted that knowledge with kindness. I think that's really the definition of a lot of like king-like energy. When you have a masculine king-like energy, it's about leading with knowledge and integrity. He knew his field, he knew his purpose, he knew his area of expertise so well. Other people appreciated his knowledge, but they also appreciated the kindness with which he imparted his knowledge on other people. Again, with humor, modesty, being well-adjusted, those things are all very masculine. While seeing Helene in this very lover energy, which is not your typical lover energy, I think also seeing Frank in this very like grounded, understated masculine energy is also really interesting because it's not that like macho man idea that we have of a masculine man or a masculine leader, but it also shows a different way that you can be in your masculine and not have it look a certain way. That's one of the things I think we get caught up in a lot in our current society, is the idea of something looking masculine or looking feminine, when at the end of the day it's really about the energy and how it comes from within. And this movie is just a really great example of just different ways that masculine and feminine energy can look, and also how much that polarity of the masculine and the feminine can happen, like even when two people are not even in the same place. And in this case, it wasn't even like a virtual thing, like they were doing it through letters. And I think that that's so charming. I know I keep using that word, but it's just such a charming film, and I highly recommend you checking it out. And if you have any thoughts on this or this movie, or if you have any other film recommendations, let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you, and I love your suggestions. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up, and be sure you subscribe to my channel. If you want to learn the art of feminine communication, then be sure you take my new masterclass, which is linked in the description box below, along with links to all my social media accounts. I couldn't find a lot of clips from this movie, but I'm going to put a few online on my TikTok and hopefully in YouTube Shorts, as long as YouTube lets me do that. So you can check out some little mini breakdowns of some of the scenes from this movie. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.